I'm just calling the meeting to order. Great to see all of you on screen and great to see all of you in the room. This is our International Peace Day, and the meeting will actually be conducted by past President Vasi Daniels, who has been instrumental in making it possible. I will start though first by just giving one or two notes. I'd like to welcome our visitors. And Clive, I don't know whether you could help me with this as ever. In the room, we have many visitors, international visitors, perhaps all Rotarian visitors in the room. Would you please stand? On another occasion, we would ask you each to introduce yourself and to to say a few words. But today, because we have time constraints, perhaps if I can just ask your name and your Rotary Club and just go around the room, and then Clive, if you could do the same on screen. Sunak.
Shaunak Reshamwala, Rotary Club of Dubai.
Rotary Club of Dubai.
Ken Abiado, Rotary Club of Singapore.
Rotary Abiado, Governor of London East. Yeah.
Sri Valipuram.
Sri Valipuram, Assistant.
Westminster West.
Sorry?
Westminster West.
Westminster West and Assistant Governor
Central.
Central.
I'm Mattia Puran from Slovenia,
Rotary Club Ljubljana.
Yes.
Slovenia.
And the same.
Marko Hojak, Rotary Club Slovenia. Those, I think, are all our international Rotarian visitors present. Clive, would you care to do the same?
Oh, well, yes, President David, I could do, but can I tell you that of the 30 people on here today, more than 20 are visitors. So I think perhaps what I'd better do is just to say we are delighted to welcome all our visitors, particularly our international visitors. You're most welcome to join us here today. And we look forward perhaps seeing you again on another occasion. President David, back to you.
Thank you. My next duty is to call for a minute's silence. But before I do that, I'd just like to acknowledge the consequence of the work that we do in trying to bring service and improvement to communities and to foster and promote peace in the world. I note that yesterday, a policeman guarding a vaccination program in Peshawar was killed because there was disagreement that people should be vaccinated against polio. So could I ask you all to think about your own considerations? Peace does not come without a cost. Could we have 1 minute silence, please? Thank you for your silence. Thank you for your thoughts. And I will now hand the meeting over to past President Vasi Daniels. Vasi.
I'd like to give the toast.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Before we have any speeches, we do have our first toast of the day, which is the loyal toast, which is to the Queen.
Queen.
Please.
Queen.
Thank you, Vasi. Over to you.
Thank you, President David. Your excellent, distinguished guests and fellow Rotarians, it is my privilege and honor to chair the International Peace event today. I would also like to thank PR and admin team for designing and circulating special flyers to all members, the speakers today, and the guests. Thank you very much for your support. We will start our special program today with a lovely prelude. I am delighted to present international classical guitarist Emre Gogel and classical flautist Sarah Ovendien. Sarah studied the flute at the Trinity College of Music, London, and now plays with the orchestras, opera companies, the Walgrave Ensemble, and of course, the duo Atherma, including the Malta Philharmonic. Sarah also plays as a soloist regularly. Her next performance is coming this Friday on the 24th of September, and she'll be performing at the Malcolm Arnold's Flute Concerto in central London. The proceeds will be donated to the National Health Service. Emre is an award-winning classical guitarist who graduated from the Royal Academy of Music Master of Arts program with the Dip Ram and Frank Britton Prize in 2014. Emre has won several prizes in guitar competitions around the world, including winning the first prize in the Paris Guitar Foundation International Guitar Competition. He has performed in music festivals and competitions in Turkey, the UK, the USA, Spain, Italy, and many others. The London-based musicians of duo Arthur was founded in 2018, and both musicians have been playing together all over the UK and internationally. I now call upon Emre and Sarah. They prepared a beautiful program for us today. They will play Ave Maria, Salute Amo, Ballad number 2, Kimbrel, and Liebe Tango. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You got us all on the dancing floor now. Thank you. It's a brief introduction about International Peace Day. The International Day of Peace was established in 1981 by the UN General Assembly. 2 decades later, in 2001, the General Assembly unanimously voted the day as a period of non-violence and ceasefire. The United Nations invites all nations to honor the cessation of hostilities during the day through the education and public awareness on issues related to peace. The 2021 theme is Recovering Better for an Equitable and Sustainable World. Each year, the International Day of Peace is observed on the 21st of September throughout the world. The UN General Assembly has declared 21st of September as a day devoted to strengthening the ideals of peace and observing 24 hours of non-violence and ceasefire. This year in particular is significant. It's the 20th anniversary of the UN resolution on the programming of action and culture. Thank you. Now, we are very privileged to have 4 very distinguished speakers on the panel today. We thank them very much for giving us their time. Each speaker will speak for 12 minutes, and you will have the opportunity to ask your questions at the end when the speakers have delivered their messages. The first speaker on the panel is Professor Augusto Lopez Carlos. Augusto Lopez Carlos is an international economist with over 30 years of experience in international organizations, including most recently at the World Bank. He is currently the executive director of the Global Governance Forum for the 2018-2019. Professor Augusto was on leave from the World Bank as senior fellow at the Edmund Wales School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Between 2011 and 2017, he was the director of the chief economist and director of the Global Competitiveness and Program of the World Economic Forum in Geneva, where he was also the editor of the Global Competitive Report and other regional reports, economic reports. He was an International Monetary Fund's resident representative in the Russian Federation during the 1990s. Before joining the IMF, Lopez Carlos was a professor of economics in Chile, in Santiago. Augusto was educated in England and in the USA, receiving a diploma in mathematical statistics from Cambridge University and a PhD in economics from Duke University. He's a very much sought after international speaker, having lectured in the last several years at some of the world leading universities and think tanks. A detailed list of lectures, publications, and papers can be found in his website, www.augustolopezclaros.com. I now call upon Professor Lopez to give us his talk.
Thank you very much, Vasi, for that kind introduction. What I thought I would do today, because time is limited, is to split my remarks in 3 big parts. I want to talk a little bit about the ideas of global order and world peace as reflected in the thinking and in the writings of very prominent individuals through the ages. I then want to move and say a few words about the kinds of actions which those thoughts and those aspirations precipitated, specifically in the 20th century, in the aftermath of World War I and World War II. And then to conclude, I'd like to share some reflections on where we are today in the first couple of decades of the 21st century. You know, it's interesting, but if you actually go back to the writings of the Italian poet Dante, it's not well known, but in 1311, he wrote a tract, a short book, in which he laments the fact that we live in a world in which there is too much violence, too much conflict. And he says, and I quote, "It is evident that mankind, too, is most free and easy to carry on its work when it enjoys the quiet and tranquility of peace. To achieve this state of universal well-being, a single world government is necessary." Isn't it fascinating that in the 14th century, Dante is framing the debate about the establishment of peace, not only as something that we need to provide a context for prosperity and for human development, but he's also actually identifying what would be the institutional innovation that would be necessary to make this possible, i.e. the creation of some kind of global governance mechanism. William Penn, nearly 400 years later, wrote an essay titled "An Essay Towards the Present and Future Peace of Europe," in which, again, he makes the case for the emergence of a federal European state. A couple of decades later in France, a very famous cleric, very popular in the salons of Paris at that time, by the name of Charles Castel de Saint-Pierre, likewise said that we needed to create a European confederation, and all its members must be placed in such a mutual state of dependence that not one of them may be in a position to resist all the others. Many students of peace and security see this statement as perhaps one of the earliest references to the notion of collective security. And of course, in the United States, in the 18th century, Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers of that new republic, said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But then he said, because they're not angels, it is necessary that people be brought under the mild and salutary coercion of the law if they are to avoid the destructive coercion of the sword. And then, as you well know, in the United States in the 18th century, in the Constitutional Convention in particular, they established the elements of a new federal government, taking away from the states many important powers, such as the power to make war. The US Constitution gives the monopoly on the use of force to the federal government. And many people have argued that this transfer of certain powers to a federal structure is what then led to the United States over the 19th century emerging gradually as the sort of preeminent global and economic power. The fact that they were able to focus no longer on interstate conflict, but on economic development, on growth, on investment, on expansion is what led to the US emerging as what it was at the late 19th, early 20th century, the preeminent power of the world. To conclude this part of my brief presentation, Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher in the late 18th, early 19th centuries, he said that the most difficult and the last problem to be solved by the human race was going to be the problem of international order. He said that we would come to a point in our development in which we would face either the peace of the vast graveyard of the human race as a result of some calamity and some war, or we would have the choice of peace by reasoned design. And in his sort of vision of peace, Kant argued for the creation of a League of Peace that would evolve into a peaceful world order and a perfect civil union of mankind. I find these very, very powerful words and concepts expressed, as long ago as the late 18th century. Of course, in our own modern era, perhaps the most important initiative was that promoted by President Wilson, the creation of the League of Nations, a very important attempt to bring the concept of collective security into an international setting. President Wilson gave a speech in the US Senate in January of 1917, in the middle of World War I, and he said that we must not aim to have a balance of power, but a community of power. We must not have organized rivalries, but we must have an organized common peace. when you actually read the speeches that President Wilson gave as he traveled around the United States trying to get public support for the League of Nations and trying to persuade senators to approve the covenant, the constitution of the League of Nations, one is really struck by his idealism, by his belief that we need to move forward and we need to create some kind of institutional infrastructure that will guarantee peace in the future. There seems to be a very heavy burden on his shoulders when he says the following. He says, "My clients are the children. They are the next generation. They do not know what promises and bonds I undertook when I ordered the armies of the United States in the soil of France. But I know and I intend to redeem my pledges to the children. They shall not be sent upon a similar errand." Wilson essentially was arguing and saying we must not ever again see the kind of calamity that we have just seen during World War I, 18 million fatalities. And he greatly felt the burden on his shoulders of having sent young people to the shores of Europe, many of whom who would not return because they would die there in the conflict. Unfortunately, as you know, the League of Nations never took off the ground. It fell captive to partisan political debates in the United States, and therefore, because it did not have the participation of the most important economic and military power, the League eventually failed, although it was a very important attempt. Around this time, 1919, the head of the Baha'i community inserted himself into this very interesting debate by writing a letter to an organization in The Hague called the Central Organization for a Durable Peace. Today, that group of intellectuals and thinkers would be called a civil society organization. But at that time in the Netherlands, in The Hague, they had organized themselves into a group that would be debating and talking to government and laying out the sort of the intellectual foundation for a better approach to peace. And they were strong supporters of the League of Nations. The head of the Baha'i community at that time argued that peace was not just an issue of signing treaties and limiting armaments, that peace needed to be complemented by a broader agenda of reforms that would look at the issues of education, of economic development, of gender, and in particular that would try to position religions as an important source of guidance and spiritual insight. This letter to this group of prominent intellectuals is called The Tablet of The Hague, and it really provides a kind of a framework for thinking about peace in a broader setting. What I find especially significant is that he calls for the creation of a supreme tribunal, some kind of sort of supranational organization made up of members of the world's parliaments that would then begin to debate the issue of peace on a more coherent and systematic basis. The next and perhaps most important initiative was, of course, as you know, the creation of the United Nations in 1945. And that effort was against the background of 60 million fatalities in World War II. This is a long story, and I'm looking at my watch and I'm running out of time. Suffice it to say, last year we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the UN Charter. It was a period of much introspection. And I think that you will agree with me that out of that process of conversation and introspection and reflection, what has emerged is a very important realization that the United Nations needs to be modernized. It needs to be adapted to the changes that have taken place since it was created. The head of the Baha'i community, Shoghi Effendi, in 1931, said something that I think remains highly relevant today, 90 years later. He said that the fundamental cause of this world unrest, he's talking about, you know, the period in the early 1930s in the middle of the Great Depression, is our failure to adjust our system of economic and political institutions to the imperative needs of a rapidly evolving age. In other words, we need to create a set of institutions which reflect the needs of contemporary society today. And the fact that we're not doing that is putting our future at risk. It is delaying the establishment of peace and security in the world. It is undermining prosperity, and it is casting a shadow over the future of mankind. So let's regroup our efforts. Let's think creatively about the kinds of reforms that need to be done in order to create the institutional architecture that would facilitate addressing all the global challenges that we face, from climate change, to income disparities, to poverty, to nuclear proliferations, on all these other problems which put at risk our future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Agustus. Thank you. Our second speaker on the panel is the former High Commissioner of the Seychelles with the United Kingdom, Her Excellency Marie-Pierre Lloyd. Born in 1952, Ambassador Marie-Pierre was educated in the Seychelles and undertook further studies at the Liverpool University and Loughborough University of Technology. During her extensive years, Ambassador Pierre joined the public service in the Seychelles as Social Development Officer in 1976, and she made her way to holding ministerial portfolios for employment, social affairs, health, and social development. Ambassador Marie-Pierre Lloyd joined the diplomatic corps in 2012 as Seychelles High Commissioner to the UK and Northern Ireland, and was ambassador of and plenipotentiary to 10 other European countries. In recognition of a commitment, dedication, and hard work to the development of the Seychelles and of the Africa region in general, Ambassador Pierre was awarded the 2011 Tata Diplomat of the Year Award for Africa. Marie-Pierre chaired the Commonwealth Working Group memorialization held in London. She was quoted stating, "The only effective way to guarantee non-recurrence of violence, genocide, conflict, terrorism, radicalization, and extremism is through education, especially of the youth." She firmly believes in that. In 2018, Marie-Pierre was appointed as Seychelles representative on the COMESA, Council of Elders for Peace and Security. Ambassador Lloyd is a Paul Harris Fellow. She joined the Rotary Club of Victoria, District 9920 in 2000, and served in various committees. After 5 years, she was elected as the first national female president of her club. During her posting in the UK, Marie-Pierre joined our Rotary Club of London and is now back as a member of the Rotary Club of Victoria. Ambassador Lloyd is currently retired and working in the Seychelles as a well-being and life coach, empowering and supporting individuals and couples on their journey to healthier, happier life for themselves and their family. I now call upon Ambassador Marie-Pierre Lloyd.
Thank you, Vasi. I must say, when I was invited by yourself to come as a speaker, and I looked at the list of the other speakers, I was wondering, why did she choose me? Because the speakers, the panel, very distinguished bunch of people coming from different backgrounds, with different backgrounds in terms of professional and otherwise, and therefore bringing a huge wealth of experience and insight to the discussion. And even coming as the second speaker after the first one, I realized that yes, we're going to bring in the different perspectives and dimensions to this topic. When I looked at the theme chosen for this year, International Day of Peace, what brought to my mind was that, okay, so we are looking at more peace as not just the absence of war, conflict, hostilities, but rather looking at equity and a sustainable world, which I read sociology as my first degree. And I've always been working, as you say, with different groups, empowering through education. I also come from, yes, Seychelles, small islands. And again, I was thinking, hey, what are you doing speaking about peace? We've never had any wars. We've never had great hostilities, whatever, which is good. We do have a center. It's the Sir James, who is the founding president of the Seychelles. He started, and we launched it in 2017, which was the Sir James Center for Peace Studies. And this is why, because we thought, yes, we can do this. Because we, as a small country, you know, we between Africa, Middle East, we have India the other side. We've managed through diplomacy to keep ourselves, as we call it, friends to all and enemy of none. And I think this also has been brought about because, and it will bring me to this understanding and respect. We started as a country with no indigenous population. Everybody came from outside, traders, whatever, and settlers, and then we have this melting pot of people. So as a nation, we don't see different groups, we don't see ethnic groups, we call ourselves all Seychellois. And I think that helps. So we don't have this sort of conflict between groups, amongst groups. Of course, we have violence. We have what I will call hostilities, even at the level of the homes. And this is where, again, I come, when we talk of peace, we tend to look at it at that global, you know, big wars, First World War, Second World War, but there's also that peace, which even in homes, like domestic violence here is quite rife. And this is, yeah, hostilities between people who are supposed to be living together and loving each other, let alone people who are not necessarily family. We're talking of wars, people coming from different countries, different tribes, different groups, and we hoping or expecting that they will be able to work and live together peacefully. So I'm coming from that, yes, there are other ways of, it can be long-term, but there are other ways which, as examples have been given, other initiatives as to how we need to reform the way, well, the international order, we need to reform the way we educate, we need to be looking more at values like understanding. And that understanding is not just a tolerance of other person, but it's also understanding what could be the basis of hostilities. What could be historically and otherwise the basis of hostilities. And once we understand this, I think it helps you tolerate and show respect for others. From the point of view, say peace. Peace is fundamental to everything. As I say, harmony in the homes, in communities, in societies, in the world. It's also, and this coming from the COMESA, which is a group of 21 countries looking at doing trade amongst the countries of Africa. We're looking at why COMESA, to do with trade, is involved. It has a program for peace and security, because without peace, you won't even have trade. You won't have prosperity. So the peace and security as a program is quite a significant one. And as I say, there have been questions as well, but what is trade, COMESA doing with? But without peace, we won't be able to have prosperity and definitely even trading across borders, etc. And again, without peace, there is no sustainable development. Because every time you think, we've heard examples from the earlier speaker, initiative try to put this in place, but doesn't seem they haven't worked, or they've worked to varying degrees. Policies, instruments, sort of security-wise policing, military interventions. If we look around now, some people will argue that there's actually more conflict. Maybe different dimension, but there's more conflict. And again, through education, understanding, is understanding also what incites people or in a group of people to incite the youth or others. Are we talking of terrorism or whatever it is, sort of, it's this incitement. So if we can develop this understanding, it's mostly through education. Through education, we say sports, the Commonwealth of sports, for peace. But again, now even in sports, we see when people feel marginalized or they want to ally themselves with a group that is marginalized, they're going to show their protest or their discontentment in one way or another. So how do we build in the young people, but also with us, this understanding, this respect for other? And again, I'll go back maybe to, I'm a Catholic, so I'll quote from my religion, is like, love your neighbor like yourself. Now, it's a statement, easier said than done, but strictly speaking, you can say love your neighbor like yourself, but do we love ourselves enough? And maybe again, we have this, a lot of wars, misunderstanding, lack of communication that is really over sometimes resources. We think there's a lack, we think there's not enough, therefore we have to make our bid for it and we exclude somebody else or another group. We look at sometimes this miscommunication. Again, with COMESA, we do mediation. And when we do mediation, it's like the mediator, the role is there to actually listen to this one, listen to the other one. And then sometimes you're just clarifying the position. It's like each one have not been listening to the other. And it happens again at the level of individuals in the homes or wherever. People don't listen. You think this is what the person said. And based on this misunderstanding, we end up fighting, or we end up, sort of killing each other and doing all those nasty things to each other. And it's based on miscommunication, misunderstanding. And understanding and respect, I think both are indispensable parts of good living in peace and harmony with each other. Understanding and respect focuses on conflict prevention. We're not reacting to wars, to fights, and sending teams and whatever. It's prevention. Prevention is always long-term, but it works. And again, understanding and respect gets us to adopt this holistic and whole understanding of the wealth of social differences that make individual beings richly diverse in distinct ways. So really, I think this is important. We've seen it recently with COVID-19, how interdependent we are, how we are all connected, whether it's through the vaccine or not, we are connected. You don't travel, but we're still connected. And I think that interdependence. So I think basic education should include those values like respect, tolerance, and it's also, as I say, understanding the origins. Sometimes we have things happening in countries and then we don't want to talk about it. But for the young people, talking of non-recurrence, we need to talk about it and explain why it happened and therefore why we would not want to see it happen again. When I chaired that Commonwealth group, it was we were looking at genocides and all sorts of other things in Commonwealth countries. And it was, we can't say, let's not talk about it. We need to talk about it because the young people especially need to understand, oh, this was wrong, or this happened because of that. Therefore, if we do this, it won't happen again. I don't know how I'm doing for time, but I think, as I said, my main thing is on that education, understanding, respect, and let us look at being more proactive. I'm not saying military or security measures are not important, but they don't have to be mutually exclusive. It's not that you have one or the other. There may be times when you need to come in with your security forces, but it has to go hand in hand with that other civil, the Commonwealth calls it civil paths to peace, because these are also important. And if we're talking of sustainable world, I think this is the way to go. And I'll finish by, again, just a quotation that says, well, normally we say we cannot give what we don't have. And again, if we have to look at that inner peace, if we're not at peace, we won't be able to give peace to others. And they say peace actually comes from remembering that only love matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Marie-Pierre. Our third speaker is the Ambassador of the Philippines to the Court of St. James, His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Manuel Ravila Lacdemio. This is His Excellency's second posting to the UK, having been ambassador from 2009 to 2010. His previous diplomatic postings were ambassador to Spain and the Principality of Andorra, ambassador to the United Mexican States, with concurrent jurisdiction over Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama. Ambassador Lacdemio's previous experience in government, including being chairman of the Philippine Racing Commission from 1994 to 1998. His Excellency is a successful businessman, having spent many years leasing and nurturing various companies and interests in trading, cargo, travel, land development, and agriculture, among others. A Renaissance man, the ambassador also devotes significant time in such pursuits as horse breeding, motorcars, orchid growing, and dance sport. His Excellency has been a member and officer of the various affiliations, clubs, and associations, including the Rotary Club of Makati West in the Philippines. Ambassador Lacdemio was studying medicine before he decided to shift to business administration and accounting. The ambassador is married to the former Mario Linda Florianda for 5 decades. I now call upon His Excellency Ambassador Lacdemio.
Thank you so much, Past President Basing. Mr. David Johnson, President of the Rotary Club of London, Lords and Ladies, officers and members of the Rotary Club of London, ladies and gentlemen. Pleasant afternoon to you all. It is my honor and privilege to join this distinguished panel today in this significant observance of the International Day of Peace by the Rotary Club of London. As the world celebrates the International Day of Peace tomorrow, the 21st of September, I believe it is fitting to direct our thoughts to the challenges that threaten global peace and security. It behooves us to reflect on what peace means to us and what we can do to contribute to its attainment. Peace is variously defined as freedom from trouble or turmoil, as a state in which there is no war or a war has ended. I submit, however, that peace is not only the absence of disturbance or war, but is also the prevalence of the rule of law, of morality, and of justice. As the world continues to grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic, there could not have been a more apt theme for this year's International Day of Peace commemoration, which is recovering better for an equitable and sustainable world. For more than a year now, we have been beset by anxiety, uncertainty, and vulnerability owing to the COVID-19 pandemic. More than ever, people are concerned about their future as their education, jobs, and businesses are affected. People have been yearning for stability and predictability. It is during these times that peace and security could seem so elusive. The COVID-19 pandemic has driven home to us the need to sustain our unity of purpose and a spirit of oneness. More than ever, we must move with a common focus and towards a shared vision. We may come from different parts of the world, have our own set of beliefs, and speak different languages, but we cannot allow these differences to encumber our common cause. Addressing climate change is one of the major challenges we now face as a global community. The pandemic has likewise underscored how climate change threatens global peace and security. The predictions on the effects of climate change on our planet are direr by the day. We must direct our time and energies to taking care of our environment in order to achieve our goal of a green and sustainable global economy. For the Philippines, among our priorities are climate finance, adaptation and mitigation, capacity building, agriculture, climate justice, and climate resiliency. With the many concerns and problems that the world currently confronts, the entire global community must join hands and work together. One or two countries alone cannot eradicate violence. 2 or 3 countries by themselves cannot tackle the issue of climate change. Indeed, it takes all peace-loving nations to work shoulder to shoulder to achieve and nurture the peace and security that we can pass on to the next generations for them to enjoy. The operative theme is, and I quote, "Recover better." We must reflect on how we can emerge stronger and better from this pandemic. For if we just go back to our old ways, then we would not have learned any lesson from this pandemic. Those of us in positions of responsibility, so much trust is reposed in each of us. We are called upon to do right by our people and by our planet. Let us heed that call. I hope I have given us all enough food for thought for today. Allow me to end my remarks today with a prayer and a wish that the future favors the world with enduring peace and security. Thank you for your attention and for this opportunity to join you all in observing this year's International Day of Peace. And as we say in the Philippines, mabuhay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency Lagdamino. Thank you. Our final speaker today is Professor Nora Ann Colton. Professor Nora Colton is director of the UCL Global Business School for Health, GBSH. GBSH is a business school dedicated to developing professionals for health and healthcare sector, as well as addressing the UN Sustainable Development Goal 3 regarding good health and well-being through research and education. Nora is health and international development economist, specialized in the Middle East. Professor Nora speaks Arabic and publishes on issues relating to the globalization and health in the MENA region. Previously, she was a joint director of education at UCL Institute of Ophthalmology and Moorfields Eye Hospital, NHS Trust, and UCL postgraduate education. Nora has also been the Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of East London, where she oversaw all academic affairs. She's the Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. She serves as a non-executive and trustee on a number of boards, including HESA, RNIB, and Vision Aid Overseas. Nora Colton has been a visiting professor at Tegan American University in Beirut and the University of Electronic Science and Technology in Chengdu in China. Professor Nora was a former member of our Rotary Club of London. I now call upon Nora Colton to deliver her message. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Vasi. It's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to speak to you on this International Day of Peace. And it's just a pleasure to be back to the Rotary Club of London, and you know, a big hello to all the members. So, you know, of course, always coming last has its benefits and also its challenges. So I hope I don't repeat too much of what has already been said, but I hope that I can be you know, able to create some reflection today, and also maybe call all of you to action. I do think it's very important to have events like this to recognize you know, the importance of peace, particularly in the world that we live in. There's a lot of conflict, but there's also a lot of what I would call regressive thinking about the world that worries me tremendously. So I'm going to really take on the challenge of this year's you know, theme, that we are inspired to think creatively and collectively about how to help each other recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed much human suffering, as we all know. It's also continued to expose the haves and the have-nots of this world. As we meet today, we live uncomfortably in a world where some of us are fully vaccinated and most people in the world are not. The human suffering of the pandemic is not over. Health systems and health workers are struggling to stay afloat in this current environment. And moreover, the importance of climate change, as was just articulated by the ambassador, lurks at our doors as well, and it will have a health impact. Yet the answers to the pandemic and climate change cannot be solved by each of us going it alone. Embracing peace is really about embracing each other. It's about humankind and humankindness, regardless of race, religion, sexuality, or nationality. It's about looking for what we share in common rather than what we have as differences. So consequently, today, I want to speak about the need for us to collectively look at peace as a product of concern for each other and tackling the challenges we face, such as COVID-19 and climate change, as a community rather than as a collection of nations focused on our own people. We live in a world where we know sometimes more about what's happening in other countries through the media than we know about what's happening in our neighborhood. But we often feel disconnected from that world, and so it doesn't really move us to act. Yet I would argue that both remain relevant to us. No longer can we separate out the two. Much of the social inequality we witness abroad is also sadly within. COVID-19 has shined a light on the inequitable health systems that we have and the inequitable impact that health and health determinants have. And it's caused by social determinants of health, such as housing, education, which was just mentioned, and access to good food. Consequently, if we want to live in a peaceful neighborhood and world, we need to champion equality at all levels, at home and abroad, and in all domains. Peace and prosperity go together, but they cannot be for only a select few. Consequently, I hope that each of us will use this day to reflect on the UN's call to action, to think creatively about the human issues at hand that we can only collectively solve. So I want to highlight two issues that I challenge us to think about, particularly as a community of Rotarians who can really make a positive influence in the world. So the first one that I'd like to speak to is the COVID-19 vaccinations. 43% of the world population has received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. 5.92 billion doses have been administered globally, and 30 million are now being administered each day. Yet only 1.9% of people in low-income countries have received at least one dose. And if we look to Africa, only 6% of people in Africa have received the vaccine, at least one dose, and only 3.78% of the whole continent of Africa has been fully vaccinated. If we go to war-torn areas such as Yemen, only 1% have been partly vaccinated. In Syria, 1.1%. And Afghanistan, a country we've all thought about in the last several weeks, in the whole country of Afghanistan, only 1.9% of people have been vaccinated, and only 1.8% of those are fully vaccinated. This vaccine disparity in the world today should be a concern for all of us. Vaccines against COVID-19 are not reaching many of the people, particularly as I've highlighted in the global South, despite donations from wealthy nations. For over a year now, health advocacy organizations have been pressuring pharmaceutical companies and governments to share patent knowledge and technology with drug manufacturers who could help produce these drugs in low-income countries. Why is this so important? This pandemic has no borders. This pandemic has no nationality. This pandemic cannot be solved nation by nation. Almost 60% of high-income countries' populations, such as the UK, are fully vaccinated, yet less than 0.6% in low-income countries. For several months now, the World Health Organization has called on companies to share licenses and manufacturing processes. We cannot stay silent when the wealth of this world and companies can help so many refuse to ensure the world's most vulnerable a global supply of vaccines. Consequently, I challenge each of us to think creatively, as we are asked today, about how we can help. Rotary, of all organizations similar to it, has been at the forefront of championing vaccines. In fact, Rotary is the leading advocate, as mentioned even today by the President, of distributing and administering vaccines that have helped reduce polio, so that today polio cases have now been reduced by 99.9%. So let's get our Rotarians to use this day to think about approaches of how we can address and help alleviate COVID-19 by increasing vaccinations worldwide, and particularly in the global South. So this brings me now to my second issue, and that is the social and health inequalities that exist today. You know, we often think about the impact of conflict and the destruction it causes. I noticed a few weeks ago, you couldn't turn on a TV channel without hearing about Afghanistan. Today, I turn on my TV channel and I hear nothing about Afghanistan. We have short memories. We tend to get caught up in the moment. We tend to get caught up with the direct conflict, and we forget that the aftermath of conflict can often last for decades. It impoverishes nations. It impoverishes people. And that poverty has impacts that we cannot imagine, particularly in terms of health systems and health inequalities. So in this year, again, where we're challenged to think about the impact of COVID, we have seen that the wider determinants of health, as I mentioned previously, such as housing, education, and socioeconomic factors, have meant that people are experiencing COVID differently. And it's not equal. And it's those who are most vulnerable who are most impacted. They have suffered the most. Their communities have suffered the most. And they continue to suffer more than others. We hear a lot about now long COVID. But what we hear less about is the impact of long COVID on millions whose lives have been altered, who now are less productive. Households where household heads are no longer able to work. So furthermore, we have to remember that it's not just about our own society. It's about the long term, the long impact, and the need to address poverty and income inequality to help address health. So furthermore, the UN has warned of a global debt sustainability crisis in the wake of this virus, which has pushed now actually 100 more million people into poverty. So why is this important? Because we live in a world that's aging, and particularly in the North, where the burden on health and health systems is moving at a rapid pace. And although technology is enabling healthcare, it is not attainable to many parts of the world. And more poverty and more deprivation is not sustainable with an aging North and an impoverished South. So developing countries are at risk of sliding into instability. So this is where the dots connect, and it comes back to peace. Because as these countries slide into instability under the weight of the pandemic, they become much more vulnerable to conflict. Lower income, increased healthcare, social expenses caused by this pandemic are leaving many low-income countries extremely vulnerable and at risk of sparking the very thing we want to stop: conflict. Risk of economic, political, and social instability cannot be dismissed. The wars that might be the fallout and may seem disjointed from COVID are not. They are, in fact, a part of a global system that's not meeting the needs of humankind. So consequently, if we are serious about peace, if we are serious about embracing this day, we need to recognize that until our fellow human has access to an equal life and support, the world will remain unstable. We can't be okay until everyone can be okay. So again, I call on Rotarians who have championed poverty alleviation to embrace the social determinants of health as an approach to bring about equity and a healthier world. So lastly, I just want to close by saying that I believe that as a collective, we recognize the interdependencies of human beings, but we need to reject the imaginary boundaries of human constructs. We can only truly achieve peace if we embrace an approach that is boundaryless. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nara Colton. Thank you. I hope, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all enjoyed our wonderful speakers today. It's now question time, and I'm going to ask Vice President Ian Balcom to take questions from Chesterfield Hotel, and Past President Clive Amos, will you kindly take questions from Zoom? So, and after that, I'll call upon Lord Ranger to give the vote of thanks. So over to you, Clive and Ian.
Thank you very much, President Barsi.
It's been 18 minutes.
Thank you.
You're doing very well.
I've got one here, Ian. Shall I take that and then you take one from the room?
Okay.
Yes, Eve and Robert, would you like to address your question, please? And can I say to all the speakers, please unmute yourself when you speak. And if you unmute yourself, you'll come to the top of my list Now I know you want to speak. Also, or you can raise your hand on the reactions button. Eve, would you like to address your question? And would you like to say to whom it is addressed, please?
Thank you very much. First of all, excellent presentations by all our speakers. And I do want to actually address my question to my fellow Rotary ambassadorial scholar, Nora, who I met probably about 5 years ago. And now I think it was 5 years ago, Nora, in London at a wonderful dinner. First of all, it's a sort of message of hope, really, because you are calling call to action really to Rotarians to step up now following and during the pandemic. And I just have one message of hope, first of all. In our last RI virtual convention, the UN Secretary General praised Rotary actually for what we are doing to help vaccinations spread across the world for COVID-19. And Rotary is actually sitting around the table right now with our partners in the Global Polio Eradication Initiative to make sure that we do get the vaccines to the areas where they're not going to at the moment. So every corner of the world. So that is something that Rotary is particularly active on. And obviously that's got the background of our polio campaign. So really my question is, what more do you think that Rotary can do as a global network in really every country practically across the world to bring about a better future in light of the pandemic that we're going through at the moment?
Well, thank you so much. And it's very good to see you again. And, I think that, yes, helping to get the vaccine, raising money for the vaccine. But I think there also needs to be an acknowledgement that we need to help, get manufacturing done more locally. Part of the problem that we're seeing now with the COVID vaccine is that the distribution channels and the supply chains are not working. So I think, the more involved organizations and the higher profile the work of Rotary can be, it will help to put pressure on governments and on pharmaceutical companies to work more together. One of the things that is happening now is there's an onslaught of creating more vaccines and more different variants. And these companies need to be encouraged, nudged by organizations and by a global membership to work together and not feel that this is very territorial and that we've got a few and we're trying to create supply chains when we've got manufacturing facilities. And we've seen that with the Russian vaccine, but it's not serving and doing what it needs to do. So I think that's where I believe that Rotary, particularly given its links to business and to the larger business community, could be very effective. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian, could you like to take a question? And then after that, I'll take Rima Tantash. Ian, please.
We've got 3 questions lined up here. But,
yes, please do.
You want to come up here? Or? My assistant, the president, has been rounding up questions.
So this is a question for Professor Augusto López Claros. And I would like to have your opinion about how and what are the main aspects of the United Nations to be modernized. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I think that there are things that come quickly to mind. I think that one of the problems that we need to address is the question of the sort of democratic legitimacy of the United Nations. At the moment, the General Assembly is largely made up of diplomats representing the government in power, and it is based on the principle of one country, one vote. So China, with a population of 1.4 billion people, has the same voting power as the island of Nauru with a population of 12,000 people. This was a flaw that was identified as the UN Charter was being debated. And there were a number of proposals at that time from people like Bertrand Russell, Albert Einstein, Granville Clark, who thought that the United Nations should be organized on a sort of a broad democratic principle, that the representation and the voting power of nations within the General Assembly should reflect some kind of objective criteria, population, economic size, we can discuss the details. And the idea was that if you could do this, not only would you boost the credibility of the organization, but also you could then gradually begin to give it certain legislative powers in particular areas, specifically focused on peace and security, and more recently on questions of the environment. The problem we have on climate change, which has figured prominently in the discussions today, is that we don't have a binding mechanism that will actually deliver a reduction in emissions. We don't have an institution that has the jurisdiction and that can actually bring a solution about. The Paris Accord of 2015 is not working because it's voluntary, and because when you add up all the commitments made by countries, they're not consistent with a limitation on temperatures of 1.5 to 2 degrees. Second, I think we need to do away with the veto power in the Security Council. This is a dinosaur from the Cold War. This is something that was embedded in the early period of the United Nations, essentially to get the US Senate to ratify the charter, where you need a 2/3 majority, and to get the Soviet Union to join the United Nations, where Stalin made it very, very clear that he wanted an organization that would be weak and that would never tell him what to do and would never undermine his national sovereignty prerogatives. So the ineffectiveness of the Security Council, this dysfunctionality of the Security Council, is very much linked to the fact that it has no moral credibility when you have the veto power embedded firmly in its operations. And then, although this is a large discussion, I think a third area is that we need to strengthen the the finances of the United Nations. It has a puny budget against the needs of the present. Dr. Cotton was very compelling in her identification of some of those needs: extreme poverty, which has risen in the last 18 months, income disparities, all the need to finance the transition to a clean energy or a renewable energy economy across the world. These needs are basically challenges that the United Nations cannot rise to because it doesn't have the financial firepower, it doesn't have the resources. And I think it limits in many ways what the organization can do. Obviously, there is more to do, and we don't have the time to discuss this, but these are, I think, 3 areas that are extremely important and in which reforms are urgently needed. Otherwise, the organization will become a little bit like the League of Nations: ineffective, increasingly irrelevant, and in due course, no doubt, perhaps in the middle of a great crisis in the world, it will be replaced by something else. That's something that is based on the rule of law, on upholding fundamental human rights, on other sound principles of global governance. At the moment, we don't have that, unfortunately.
Thank you. Can I just ask Rima Tamtash, and then Ian, I will hand back to you with the rest of the questions. So this will be the last one on Zoom, I'm afraid. Time's running against us. Rima, would you like to address your question, please?
Yeah, I'd like first to thank every and each one of our speakers, because their insights from his point of view was really great. My question really, I'm just talking about a citizen of the world, as a human being. As peace always comes from within, as Mary Pierre has mentioned. And this having peace of mind for each and everyone, at least having a roof on their top and having food and health for their family, is very important for the peace process to spread around the world. If we don't have that, how do you think we can achieve peace? My question this question maybe is for Nora and for Ewisto. What are the first steps to do that? And it cannot be any more evident than the COVID-19 has really made it clear about the inequality, social inequality, and wealth distribution in the world is really so many people are suffering still. So that's number one. The second one, I would like to ask Augusto.
Can you make it rather quick, please?
No, this is a continuation for that, Clive. Sorry. I agree very much with what you said now about the UN restructuring. However, I come from a part of the world where I don't know if it's right to say that we don't believe in the efforts of the UN anymore, because you tend to see that the greedy become greedier and the powerful become more powerful, and some people have no rights at all in this whole world. And I don't know where this is taking us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Would you like to start, Nora?
Of course. So Rima, thank you so much for these questions. These are not easy answers. If I had the answers, I'd have the excellent for all the world problems really. But not to trivialize. It's a very important point that you're making, and I think what we have seen with COVID is that too we need to acknowledge that these are not just problems in the global South. They're problems in our own backyard. In the UK, of course, and particularly in London, East London was where, those boroughs, we saw the worst cases of COVID. We saw more deaths from COVID. We've seen more long COVID. So we know that there is a correlation between, social economic variables and health. And yes, and we know that social economic variables, Paul Collier at Oxford, has written some great works drawing on the correlation between, economics, of course, and conflict. So I think, what we have to be able to do is challenge our social construct. We have to think about whether or not the way we have organized our markets, the way we look at marketing perfections, the way we think about our economies and what's right and wrong. I think it's a much bigger conversation. And I think that we are often reluctant to do that, particularly individuals like myself who have benefited from the current way in which we've organized ourselves. But I do think, as Augusto alluded to, until we are willing to transfer finances, ensure organizations like the UN have the kind of firepower that they need, I'm reluctant to believe that these will not be more than, tinkering at the edges.
Thank you. Ian, over to you. I'm not taking any more Zoom questions, I'm afraid.
Vidyan, all set up and ready to rock and roll. There we go.
I'm ready to go. That's very good. Thank you very much to all the speakers. My question was also about institutional reform of the United Nations and its agencies. I'm aware of the history that in the original discussions, it was suggested that there should be a proportionate degree of voting on population. However, it was, of course, a victor's charter, and to some extent, and that is how we have the Security Council we have. How are we going to get that kind of reform? For example, in relation to China, they're in breach of a judgment of the Permanent Court of International Justice in The Hague in relation to the Law of the Sea Convention. It is also suggested that they have had undue influence in the WHO. How are we going to ensure that the democratic process develops in such a way that everyone has their interests protected, and it is not the person with the largest population or the biggest stick?
Thank you. That is an excellent question. It seems to me that most people will agree that the current system as we have it, with all the flaws that I have identified and that we are all aware of, is not working, right? The system that was set up in 1945 at the San Francisco Conference, 75 years later, is no longer delivering solutions to the world problems. So we basically have two options going forward. We either have the political will and the imagination to introduce the reforms which will turn the United Nations into a problem-solving organization that will be able to solve for us the problems that affect every people's lives, increasingly climate change and the calamities that are coming our way. Or alternatively, what will happen is that the organization will become irrelevant. It will no longer be seen by the business community, by civil society, by the population of the world as being relevant to their concerns of every day. Those are the two choices that we face. So countries, China and the United States and others, will continue to have the veto power, but it will be as useless power. It will not deliver any good to humanity. So I think we are at a critical moment in history, the next 10 years in particular, unless we get our act together, unless we make very important changes to our institutions, to our habits, and to our policies. Climate change will create the kind of multidimensional crisis, which I think will eventually deliver either a new organization or the political will to modernize and make the current organization relevant to the needs of today.
Thank you. I think we've got one more question. We've got time. No, we haven't. No, we haven't got time. Okay, back to Ross. Okay, back to control, as it were. Vasi, if you want to.
Vasi.
Yes, okay. Right, thank you very much for all that. I'm sorry we have short time. And I'd like to call upon Lord Ranger to give the vote of thanks, and that will be followed by our President David to conclude the meeting with announcements and the final toast.
Thank you, Vasi. I have thoroughly enjoyed the program, and I would like to thank the Rotary Club and the President David Johnson, and especially you, the ambassador of the President, for putting this amazing event together with such illustrious speaker with so much experience and knowledge about the geopolitical world, so to share with us. So we are indebted to all those speakers, and especially the musicians who entertained us, and guitarist and the Ernie Gokul and Sarah Overton. They were really magnificent. And I am indebted to President for asking me to give this to perform a pleasant duty of giving a vote of thanks to all those people who made this event possible. So first of all, I will start with thanking the Rotary Club, the President and President Ambassador Vasi for working so hard to give us this amazing event. And I also like to thank the participants, the speakers, those who have given their valuable time. And we have such amazing array of speakers with experience. I've gone through their bio. It's amazing. Professor Augusto Lopez Carlos, we are grateful to you for your insight. Ambassador Marie Pierre, Mr. Antonio Manuel Lagomio, and Professor Nora Colton. So 4 of you have shared so much knowledge with us, and you make us much better informed than ever before. I'm a child of a conflict. I was born during the partition of India because, as you know, the country was divided on the basis of religion, and over 1 million people were killed. Nearly 10 million became refugees. I lost my father and I became a refugee, and I started my journey in a refugee camp without a father, but a remarkable mother who brought 8 of us through immense difficulty. She worked as a teacher. So what I'm trying to say today is that we cannot achieve anything until there's peace. Without peace, there's no development, there's no progress. No one can ever achieve anything when they are surrounded by conflict. We are wasting lots of precious life. Look at me, who was honored by the Queen on 8 occasions, and I'm a refugee child, a conflict child. So there are a lot of people in Yemen, in Iran, in Syria, in Afghanistan. They could be our world leader, future leader. They could be scientists. They could bring a lot of things to the humanity, but unfortunately, they are being put in a situation where they have to think of their own survival rather than thinking of their own dream and aspiration. So I think for the world to progress, the world to find solution for COVID or any other disease, we need to have a peaceful world. And I cannot stress how important it is to empower women, because if a father dies prematurely, he will leave behind a mother unable to deal with the world, unable to deal with his children, and a woman unable to deal with the world. So a women empowerment is a prerequisite for civil society or for any society to progress, because in the country you can see where women are not empowered, they are going backward, and where people are empowered, they are surging ahead. And this disparity is another cause of conflict. When you have two societies, one progressing, one not progressing, they're bound to have a conflict with one another. And religious tolerance is very, very important, because unfortunately the religious leader, no one is born intolerant, nobody is born a terrorist, no one is born a criminal, but the people surrounding them, society, will shape their career. So I think we need to bring to book all those preachers of hatred who destroy the mind of a beautiful child who is a gift by God to do something wonderful for the world. So United Nations must have a new charter where equality for women, equality for religion is prerequisite for a membership. You know, unfortunately, as your speaker alluded, that the United Nations has failed. It failed in many places because it is dominated by superpowers, and because they are depending on their subscription, they're depending on their premises or whatever. But I think we need to have a United Nations. We need to, the world has to unite, because in this ever shrinking global world, we are interdependent. We just can't insulate or isolate ourselves from the event happening in Afghanistan, because those will affect us, because terrorists can take a plane and they can reach any part of the world. So therefore, we are now a global village, and therefore we need to really work in harmony to make sure that we do not produce intolerant and people who live in who do not live in harmony. So my final word of thanks is to the staff and management of Chesterfield for always giving us an excellent facility and excellent service. And all this is possible because we have a great Rotarian team. They are committed. I have only joined you recently, but I'm already motivated and excited that the amount of goodness, the working for peace is a fundamental for human development. So President, I salute you for your leadership and putting together this event. So I thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Lord Ranger. Thank you, every single speaker, and thank you to everyone who asked those questions which broaden our understanding of the subjects. As Rotarians, we all have the same challenge. It's the same question: how do we make a difference? And I hope that you've given us some guidance towards that. My first notice is actually a district notice for those that wish to join tomorrow's International Peace Day, because tomorrow is actually International Peace Day, and district is holding an online service at 11:55 tomorrow. So anyone who wishes to join the district service, the district newsletter has the information, and I'm sure that any inquiry of our secretariat would also provide you with a Zoom link. It is normal at a meeting to cover birthdays, And today we have 3 birthdays I'd like to note, one of whom is not actually a member. And most unusually, neither is he here. But Paul Wilson, whose birthday it was yesterday, 70th birthday, but don't tell anybody, has been instrumental in establishing our hybrid links and very, very supportive. So in your absence, happy birthday, Paul. Members whose birthdays we're celebrating are Ajal Karia and Caroline Moore. I don't know whether either of them are online. They're not in the room, Clive.
They're not online, President David. No.
So happy birthday to all. Now I'd like to ask Tim McAndrews just to approach the dais to say a few words about an event this week. But before he does, I have to report that we've had a physical collection in the room today. I know all of those people on Zoom have the opportunity of making a donation either by text or by donor box. But in the room, we've had quite a good collection, which has raised £90, which will go towards children's charities. So thank you everybody in the room for that donation, and anybody who online who's made a donation, we really appreciate that. At the moment,
President, with your permission, I will double that donation, and I forgot to thank Clive for quietly managing the show. So I will double that donation.
Thank you. It's quite easy to forget Clive, but without Clive, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be seeing you. I think Clive understands he is fully appreciated. Thank you, Clive.
I do indeed. Thank you very much.
Now, before I do my last notice, I'll ask past President Tim McAndrews to make an announcement about Wednesday.
Fellow Rotarians, okay, our president has just asked how we can make a difference, and I'm going to tell you in a small way how you can make a difference. This coming Wednesday, we have our Rotary Club of London Golf Challenge. It is not particularly actually about playing golf. What it is about is raising money for 3 particular children's hospices: Lifeline for Kids, Noah's Ark Hospice, and Richard House Children's Hospice. And the way we're doing that is we're going to play 3 teams next Wednesday. There'll be a president's team, a vice president's team, and a secretary's team. And each one of them will be raising money, are raising money for one of those 3 fantastic charities. And if you give £50 to a particular nominated team, they get what's called a mulligan, which is a free shot on the day to help them win. Now, we've got about 120 members in this club, and so far only 10 of you have kindly donated money to this game of golf, or this hospice appeal, if you'd rather call it that. Those 10 people have raised £1,200 very generously. Gift aid is going to be added to that £1,200, which brings it up to about £1,600. And then we get it doubled because, as has been explained in the circular that's come round, there's a particular very generous individual in this club who has agreed to fund match whatever we raise for our golf. So that £1,600 is already at £3,200. So I would ask you please to consider donating. You can either put it generally into the pot for the golf day, or you can nominate the president's team, the vice president's team, and the secretary's team for a little bit of fun. That's what it's all about. I will add that if anyone wants to come to our dinner at the end of golf, it's the Moore Park Golf Club. It's going to be a very pleasant 3-course meal. We'll probably have a raffle. It's 6:30 on Wednesday. I need to know by 6 o'clock tonight if there's any additions to the 20 or so people currently coming. I think that covers everything, President David, on our golf day. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim. Last year, we managed to raise £20,000 with the contributions from Sir David. So this year, we still would like to raise £5,000 from members if we can. So please consider whether it is your time to actually donate to a children's charity. And if it is, please access either by bank transfer, by donor box, or by a cheque to Hugh. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't come in for a few days. If we know it's on its way, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you. We're running a little bit over time, I'm afraid, Vasi, but we're doing our best. The next week's event, our speaker is Christo Papa, one of the top cardiac thoracic surgeons in the country. And he wants to share his experience of COVID patients with you and his conclusions about the impact of COVID on such things as the heart muscles. We know how much there has been about the impact of COVID or vaccines on, particularly we're talking about young people's hearts. So Christo is going to enlighten us on that next week. That just leaves me to give the final toast of the day, which is one which I'm sure you will all support. It is something we all seek to achieve. Rotary and peace the world over.
Rotary and peace the world over.
I will now ring the bell to close the meeting. Thank you.